In this video, we'll discuss the basics of configuring a Cisco Layer 2 switch. This is actually pretty simple because all the interfaces on Cisco switches are live by default. You can pull a Cisco switch out of the box, plug it in, and start plugging workstations into it, and it'll start learning the MAC addresses of those workstations automatically. It'll start building its CAM table and then start forwarding data intelligently or filtering data when it doesn't have to forward them. So switches really are plug and play in the Cisco world. Does that mean you don't have to configure them? No, they still need password protection, they still need IP addresses so you can remotely access them, and they need other basic configuration settings. So what things should you configure on a switch if they are, in fact, plug and play? Well, the most important thing you can configure is passwords. There are different types of passwords that protect access to command modes on Cisco devices. You should minimally configure console, virtual terminal, or VTY, and enable mode passwords. There are no passwords on any Cisco equipment by default, so you should define these to protect access to user mode and privileged mode on the device. You'll also want to configure the switch with an IP address. The primary purpose of an IP address on a Layer 2 switch is to let you remotely access that switch after its initial configuration. Remember, there are two methods for accessing Cisco equipment. You can connect to a Cisco device directly with a console cable, or remotely, using applications like Telnet or Secure Shell. But to connect to a switch remotely means you're going to be connecting to it based on its IP address, so that has to be defined on the switch. A Layer 2 switch would have a single IP address used for remote management. Then, lastly, you'll want to define a default gateway on the switch. This works in tandem with the IP address so that you can access the switch even if you're not connected to its same network. In the example, let's assume that the switch is connected to a router, and that router is connected to another switch, which is where you are. Each interface on a router defines a different network to the system. The devices on the left side of the router are on one network, and the devices on the right side of the router are on a different network. In fact, that's the definition of routing, the movement of data from one network to another. But now, because your workstation isn't on the same network as the switch, you can't access it directly by IP unless you have default gateways defined on both sides. The default gateway is the device that you have to pass data toward to get beyond your own network. So if this is my workstation on the left and I'm trying to get to something on the right, my default gateway would point to the local interface of the router servicing my network. The switch would have to have a default gateway configured that points to its local router interface. The default gateway enables devices to get to networks other than their own. Once these are defined, I can use Telnet, Secure Shell, or web protocols to remotely access the switch for management purposes. And that's all for our overview of switch configuration. This video discussed some of the basics of setting up a Cisco Layer 2 switch, which include configuring passwords, IP addresses, and the default gateway.